welcome. Tonight, we do not seek the familiar giants, the icons that thunder through our collective imagination. We turn away from the well-trodden paths of prehistory, away from the shadows of Tyrannosaurus and the long necks of the sauropods. Instead, we venture into the deeper, quieter corners of Earth's vast, lost library. We seek the stories that are rarely told, the creatures that time, and sometimes even science, forgot. This is a journey into the strange, the baffling, and the utterly bizarre. We will encounter creatures that seem dreamed rather than evolved, animals that walked on stilts, wore their skeletons like nested cones, possessed necks longer than their bodies, or wielded teeth like daggers. These are the forgotten players, the evolutionary experiments, the beautiful dead ends, and the surprising survivors that populated our planet long before we arrived. Each one holds a unique secret, a different piece of the immense puzzle of life's history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story of life on Earth is often told as a grand parade of famous dynasties: the age of fishes, the age of dinosaurs, the age of mammals. But beneath these headline acts, in the quiet interludes and the shadowy margins, countless other stories unfolded. Worlds rose and fell, populated by creatures so strange that their fossilized remains often confused and confounded the very scientists who unearthed them. These are the organisms that challenge our assumptions, that force us to rethink the neat lines of the evolutionary tree. They are the footnotes, the outliers, the beautiful mistakes, and the profound mysteries, but they are no less a part of our planet's heritage. Their stories reveal the sheer, boundless creativity of life, its willingness to experiment, to try improbable forms, to explore every possible way of being. Tonight, we become paleontological detectives, dusting off the pages of Earth's forgotten past. We will resurrect 5 of these incredible creatures from the silence of stone, exploring their bizarre anatomies, the alien worlds they inhabited, and the enduring mysteries they still hold. Our journey begins over 500 million years ago, in the aftermath of life's first great explosion, in a place where the fossils themselves seemed like hallucinations from a primeval dream. Our first forgotten creature hails from a time of unparalleled evolutionary invention, a biological Big Bang known as the Cambrian explosion. Beginning around 541 million years ago, in a relatively short geological window, the blueprints for almost every major animal group alive today suddenly appeared in the fossil record. It was an astonishing burst of creativity, filling the ancient seas with a bewildering array of new forms. Creatures with shells, skeletons, legs, eyes, and jaws. It was the dawn of the animal kingdom as we know it. But the Cambrian explosion was not just about the origins of the familiar. It was also a time of wild, untamed experimentation, an era when evolution seemed to be throwing every possible design at the wall just to see what would stick. Many of these early experiments were unlike anything that came before or after. They were biological oddities, creatures built according to rules that seem alien to us now. And the single greatest window we have into this strange, primordial laboratory is a fossil bed unlike any other on Earth. To find it, we must travel high into the Canadian Rocky Mountains to a specific quarry located in Yoho National Park, British Columbia. This is the Burgess Shale. Discovered in 1909 by the remarkable paleontologist Charles Doolittle Woolcott, the Burgess Shale is not just a fossil site, it is a miracle. Like the Solnhofen limestone that preserved Archaeopteryx, and the lianing lake beds that revealed the feathered dinosaurs. This is one of those vanishingly rare Lagerstätten, a place where the conditions were perfect for preserving not just the hard shells and bones, but the faint, ghostly impressions of soft-bodied creatures. Imagine this place, 508 million years ago. It was not a mountain peak. It was the deep, muddy bottom of an ancient sea, lying at the foot of a colossal underwater cliff, perhaps a limestone reef built by primitive algae. Life teemed in the shallower waters above this cliff, but the basin below was likely deep, cold, and, crucially, anoxic, devoid of oxygen. Periodically, disaster would strike. Perhaps an underwater mudslide, triggered by a storm or an earthquake, would cascade down the face of that great cliff. This tumbling river of fine, silty mud would sweep up the unfortunate creatures living on the reef edge and carry them down, instantly burying them in the oxygen-poor darkness of the basin below. Here, in this gentle, muddy tomb, the normal processes of decay were halted. Scavengers could not reach them. Bacteria could not easily break them down. Their soft bodies, delicate appendages, and even sometimes the faint outlines of their internal organs were pressed into the fine sediment, leaving behind perfect, dark impressions as the mud slowly hardened into shale over hundreds of millions of years. When Walcott and later paleontologists split open these slabs of dark, unassuming shale, they found themselves staring into the face of an alien world. Here were creatures with 5 eyes and a grasping nozzle. Creatures that looked like armored slugs covered in spines, the first complex predators with grasping claws. And nestled amongst them, perhaps the strangest, most baffling creature of all, a tiny, spiny worm that seemed, for all the world, to be walking upside down on stilts. This was the creature that would eventually earn the name Hallucigenia. Within the treasure trove of biological strangeness that is the Burgess Shale, perhaps no creature initially caused more sheer, head-scratching confusion than the tiny fossil that would eventually be named Hallucigenia. When the brilliant paleontologist Simon Conway Morris began his intensive re-examination of Charles Walcott's Burgess Shale collection in the 1970s, he encountered this particular fossil, a small, slender, worm-like impression, rarely more than an inch or 2 long, and found himself staring at something that seemed to defy all biological logic. The creature appeared to have a single row of delicate, tentacle-like appendages running along what looked like its back, and beneath its long, tubular body, sprouting downwards, was a series of paired, stiff, pointed spines. Conway Morris, faced with this bizarre arrangement, attempted to reconstruct the creature as best he could, based on the anatomical rules he knew, the tentacles on its back. He interpreted these as feeding appendages, perhaps filtering tiny particles from the water, and those stiff, paired spines underneath, they must surely be legs, stilts. The creature, he concluded, must have walked along the ancient seafloor, awkwardly, precariously, balanced upon these rigid, pointed spikes. It was a reconstruction that was, frankly, nightmarish. Imagine a tiny worm-like body held high off the ground on 7 pairs of sharp, unbending stilts, with a row of waving tentacles reaching up from its back. It seemed impossibly clumsy, biologically inefficient, and utterly unlike anything else known in the entire history of life. And what about its head? At one end of the fossil, there was a faint, bulbous, indistinct blob. At the other, there seemed to be nothing. Conway Morris, making the best of this ambiguous evidence, placed the indistinct blob as the creature's head, assuming the other end must be its tail. He recognized the sheer, dreamlike oddity of his reconstruction. He even named the creature accordingly, Hallucigenia, a name derived from the Latin word hallucinatio, meaning wandering of the mind, delusion, or dream. He saw it as a creature so strange, so bizarre, that it seemed like a hallucination conjured from the deep past. His reconstruction, published in 1977, became an instant icon of Cambrian weirdness. It was featured in textbooks, in popular articles, a perfect symbol of just how strange and experimental life could be during this explosive period. Hallucigenia, the stilt-walking worm with tentacles on its back and a blob for a head, became the poster child for evolutionary oddities. For nearly 15 years, this was the accepted image. Scientists debated how such a creature could possibly have functioned. How did it balance on those rigid stilts? How did it feed with those dorsal tentacles? Was it even a real creature, or perhaps just a disconnected piece of a larger, even stranger animal? The creature remained a beautiful, perplexing, and deeply unsatisfying puzzle. It was a reconstruction born from logic, yet it screamed biological implausibility. It would take another discovery on the other side of the world, in rocks that offered an even clearer window into this ancient world, to finally turn Hallucigenia's world, quite literally, the right way up. For 15 years, Simon Conway Morris's bizarre, stilt-walking reconstruction of Hallucigenia stood as the accepted, if deeply puzzling, image of this Cambrian enigma. It was a creature born from a logical interpretation of ambiguous evidence, a testament to the challenges of reconstructing life from faint, 500-million-year-old shadows. The truth, it turned out, was hiding in plain sight, waiting for fossils of even greater clarity to emerge from the stone. The breakthrough came not from the Burgess Shale, but from another, equally miraculous fossil site discovered halfway around the world. In the early 1990s, paleontologists began to explore the rich fossil beds near Chengjiang, in China's Yunnan province. Like the Burgess Shale, Chengjiang is a Lagerstätte, a site of exceptional preservation, capturing the soft-bodied wonders of the early Cambrian period with breathtaking detail. And among the treasures unearthed at Chengjiang were fossils that looked remarkably familiar. They were tiny, worm-like creatures bearing the same unmistakable arrangement of spines and tentacles as the Canadian Hallucigenia. But the Chinese fossils were preserved with a subtly different quality, a clarity that allowed two paleontologists, the Swedish Lars Ramskjöld and the Chinese Hou Xiangguang, to see what had been obscured before. They looked closely at these new specimens, and they noticed something crucial: those stiff, paired spines. In the Chinese fossils, they were clearly pointing upwards, away from the surface the creature rested upon. And those delicate, tentacle-like appendages, they were clearly paired, running along the underside of the creature. The revelation was as simple as it was profound. Conway Morris hadn't reconstructed a bizarre, stilt-walking monster. He had simply reconstructed the creature upside down. Those stiff spines were not legs. They were defensive armor, a row of sharp, protective spikes running along the creature's back, designed perhaps to deter the primitive predators of the Cambrian seas, like the giant Anomalocaris. And those delicate tentacles, they were the legs, not rigid stilts, but soft, flexible, unjointed cone-shaped limbs, tapering perhaps to tiny hooked claws at their tips. These were lobopods, a type of simple, fleshy leg characteristic of a whole group of strange, worm-like Cambrian creatures, the ancestors of today's velvet worms and tardigrades. Hallucigenia didn't walk on stilts. It shuffled along the seabed on 7 pairs of soft, stubby legs. With this single, elegant reversal, the creature transformed from a biological impossibility into something that, while still strange, made a certain elegant sense. It was a small, armored worm protected by dorsal spines, walking on soft, fleshy legs. But one mystery remained. What about the head? Conway Morris had tentatively placed the indistinct, bulbous blob at one end as the head. But the Chinese fossils, preserved with greater fidelity, revealed that this blob was not part of the creature at all. It was often just a stain, a fluid leakage that occurred as the creature decayed within the sediment. So where was the head? Ramscold and Hu looked closely at the other end of the creature, the end that Conway Morris had assumed was the tail, and there, revealed by the exceptional preservation of the Chengjiang fossils, they found it. A simple, slightly downturned head, lacking complex jaws but possessing incredibly tiny, primitive eyes. Just simple light-sensing spots perhaps, but eyes nonetheless. And beneath the head, extending forwards, was evidence of a simple gut trace running the length of its body. The hallucination was over. The creature finally resolved into focus. Hallucigenia was no longer a dreamlike monster. It was a real, functioning, and profoundly fascinating animal. A small, armored, big-eyed lobopodian shuffling through the mud of the Cambrian seafloor, its spiny back a warning to anything that might try to eat it. The puzzle was solved. The creature had found its feet and its head. And now, scientists could finally begin to ask with more confidence how this strange, spiny worm actually lived its life. With its orientation finally corrected, its spines pointing skyward and its delicate lobopod legs firmly planted on the seabed, the life of Hallucigenia begins to emerge from the realm of pure fantasy and into the realm of plausible biology. Let us try now to reconstruct the world through the simple eyes of this tiny, armored worm as it navigated the complex and dangerous landscape of the Cambrian sea floor. We must imagine Hallucigenia as a small creature, perhaps only an inch or two long, living in the bustling, shallow marine environments revealed by the Burgess Shale and Chengjiang fossil beds. The seabed here was not a barren desert. It was likely coated in the familiar microbial mats, perhaps interspersed with strange sponge-like organisms and forests of primitive algae-like life. The water column above would have been filled with a bizarre menagerie of early arthropods, primitive chordates, and the first complex predators. It was a world teeming with new evolutionary experiments. And Hallucigenia was one of the ground dwellers. Picture it moving with a slow, deliberate shuffle across the soft sediment. Its 7 pairs of lobopods, those soft, unjointed legs tipped perhaps with tiny claws, were likely not built for speed. They suggest a creature that moved with a gentle, caterpillar-like undulation, carefully picking its way through the microbial landscape. What was it doing? How did it feed? Its simple head, lacking complex jaws or specialized feeding appendages, offers few direct clues. Perhaps it was a detritivore, slowly consuming the rich organic debris that settled on the seafloor, using simple mouthparts to ingest the nutrient-rich mud. Or perhaps it was a more specialized feeder. Some scientists have noted its association with other organisms, particularly sponges. Could Hallucigenia have lived upon, and perhaps fed upon, the sponges that populated the Cambrian reefs? Its small claws might have been perfectly suited for gripping the porous surface of a sponge, allowing it to slowly graze upon its tissues, or perhaps filter tiny food particles from the water currents flowing around its host. And then there were those magnificent, sharp spines running along its back. These were clearly not for walking. Their purpose seems almost certainly defensive. In a world newly populated by creatures like Anomalocaris, the giant, swimming predator with its grasping claws and circular mouth, a small, soft-bodied worm would have been an easy target. Those stiff, paired spines would have provided a formidable deterrent. Imagine a predator attempting to grasp or swallow this creature. It would have been like trying to eat a mouthful of needles. The spines were a clear message. Do not touch. Its simple eyes, those tiny light-sensing spots on its head, would have given it only a rudimentary awareness of its surroundings. It would not have seen the world in sharp detail, but perhaps only in shifting patterns of light and shadow, enough to detect the looming presence of a potential threat, or perhaps to navigate towards areas of greater safety or richer food. Its life was likely a slow, quiet, and cautious existence, a constant balance between finding food and avoiding becoming food itself. It was a small player in a world that was rapidly becoming more complex and more dangerous. It was not a fearsome hunter, nor a dominant force. It was a survivor, a creature that had found a unique and successful way to navigate the challenges of the Cambrian explosion, armed with soft legs, simple eyes, and a formidable crown of thorns. It was a beautiful, strange, and ultimately successful design. But was it merely an evolutionary oddity, a Cambrian curio destined to vanish without a trace? Or did this spiny, shuffling worm leave behind a living legacy, a hidden connection to the creatures that still walk the earth today? For decades after its true upside-down nature was revealed, Hallucigenia remained a creature of profound oddity. It was no longer a hallucination, but it was still deeply strange, a spiny, soft-legged worm seemingly unlike anything else in the animal kingdom. Was it just another beautiful evolutionary dead end, a Cambrian curio destined to vanish without leaving any descendants? Or could we find, somewhere in the quiet corners of our modern world, a living echo of this ancient form? The answer, incredibly, seems to be yes. To find it, we must leave the 500-million-year-old seabeds of the Burgess Shale and travel to the damp, dark, hidden places of today's tropical forests, under rotting logs within leaf litter in the perpetual twilight of the forest floor. Here, living a secretive, nocturnal life, crawls one of the most ancient and enigmatic groups of animals alive today, the velvet worms, or Onychophora. Imagine a creature that looks like a soft-bodied caterpillar, perhaps a few inches long. It moves with a slow, fluid, hydrostatic gait, its body rippling as it walks, and sprouting from its underside are pairs of stubby, unjointed, fleshy legs, tipped with tiny hooked claws. Its head is simple, bearing a pair of antennae and small, unassuming eyes. It breathes through simple pores scattered across its velvety skin. And it possesses a bizarre and unique hunting weapon, glands near its mouth that can shoot jets of sticky, entangling slime to trap its small insect prey. These are the velvet worms. They are evolutionary relics, a lineage that has crawled, largely unchanged, through the undergrowth of the world for hundreds of millions of years. They are often called living fossils, a window into a time before the arthropods, before the insects and spiders had fully conquered the land. Now, let us compare this humble, modern creature to the ghost of Hallucigenia. Look closely at those stubby, fleshy legs tipped with claws. They are lobopods, the exact same kind of simple, unjointed limb that carried Hallucigenia across the Cambrian seabed. Look at the simple head, the soft, elongated body. While Hallucigenia had its dramatic dorsal spines, a feature also seen in some other fossil lobopodians, the fundamental body plan, the very way of being a soft-bodied, multi-legged worm, is strikingly similar. This connection, once proposed, became increasingly clear. Hallucigenia was not an isolated oddity. It was a member, perhaps an early and unusually spiny member, of this ancient and enduring group, the Lobopodia. This group, which flourished in the Cambrian seas, included a whole range of strange, worm-like creatures with fleshy legs, and the velvet worms of today are their last surviving descendants, the sole inheritors of this ancient body plan. This realization was transformative. It placed Hallucigenia firmly on the map of life. It was no longer a bizarre alien, but a relative, however distant, of a creature still living among us. It rooted the Cambrian weirdness in the tangible reality of the modern world, and the story gets even deeper. This group, the Lobopodia, including both Hallucigenia and the velvet worms, sits at a crucial junction in the animal family tree. They are widely considered to be either the direct ancestors of, or very closely related to the sister group of, the single most diverse and successful animal phylum on Earth, the Arthropoda, the phylum that includes all the insects, spiders, crustaceans, and millipedes. That simple, stubby lobopod leg, tipped with claws, is seen as the evolutionary precursor to the complex, jointed leg of an arthropod. The segmented bodies, the hardening exoskeletons, all the features that define the arthropods may have had their humble origins right here in these soft-bodied Cambrian pioneers. Our first forgotten creature, the one that seemed like a hallucination, the one that walked upside down in our imagination for 15 years, turns out to be something far more profound. It is a glimpse of our own incredibly deep arthropod ancestry. It is a messenger from the very dawn of complex animal life, a spiny, shuffling worm that reminds us that even the strangest, most forgotten creatures can hold the keys to understanding the very foundations of the world we know. Its story is a perfect testament to why we seek out these ghosts in the stone, why we listen for the whispers of the forgotten, because sometimes the most bizarre dreams turn out to be our own family history. Our journey now takes us forward in time, leaving the bizarre, experimental gardens of the Cambrian behind. We move into the next great chapter of the Paleozoic era, the Ordovician period, beginning roughly 485 million years ago. The world is changing. The continents continue their slow, relentless drift, rearranging the geography of the planet. Global climates are generally warm, perhaps even warmer than the Cambrian, and sea levels are exceptionally high, flooding vast portions of the continents under shallow tropical oceans. And in these warm, sunlit, shallow seas, life is undergoing another profound transformation. The Cambrian explosion had established the basic blueprints, the major animal phyla. Now, in the Ordovician, these groups began to diversify, to specialize, to engage in a new and more complex ecological dance. This period is sometimes called the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event. Life wasn't just inventing new forms, it was refining them, building ecosystems with a depth and complexity the world had never seen before. Imagine descending into one of these Ordovician seas. The scene is instantly richer, more structured than the Cambrian world we left behind. For the first time, we see the rise of massive reef systems. These are not yet built by corals as we know them, but by strange, extinct groups of sponges like the stromatoporoids and bizarre cone-shaped organisms called receptaculatids, along with abundant bryozoans. These reefs create vast, three-dimensional cities on the seafloor, teeming with life. The trilobites, those armored arthropods that dominated the Cambrian, are still here, and they are incredibly diverse. But they are no longer the undisputed rulers. New players are emerging. We see the first primitive jawed fish beginning to appear, small, armored predators that add a new level of danger to the water column. The eurypterids, those formidable sea scorpions, continue their reign, some reaching truly impressive sizes. And everywhere, clinging to the reefs, carpeting the seafloor, are the brachiopods. These shelled creatures, resembling clams, but belonging to a completely different phylum, become overwhelmingly abundant, their countless fossilized shells forming thick limestone beds in Ordovician rocks around the world. The world is becoming more crowded, more complex, and more competitive. The simple, mat-grazing lifestyles of the Cambrian are giving way to more specialized feeding strategies. Filter feeders abound on the reefs. Detritivores sift through the increasingly churned-up sediment, and crucially, predation is becoming a major evolutionary force. The gentle peace of the earliest Cambrian is over. Armor, speed, and weaponry are becoming the keys to survival. It is in this dynamic, diversifying, and increasingly dangerous world that a new kind of hunter rises to prominence. It belongs to a group we met briefly in the Cambrian, but which now, in the Ordovician, truly comes into its own, achieving sizes and forms that would dominate the oceans for millions of years. They are the cephalopods, and their first great dynasty was ruled by the giants with the straight horns. Among the burgeoning cast of characters in the Ordovician seas, one group embarked on an evolutionary trajectory that would establish them as the undisputed masters of intelligence, speed, and predation in the invertebrate world. These were the cephalopods, a lineage whose name literally means head-foot, a wonderfully accurate description for creatures whose bodies consist primarily of a prominent head surrounded by a ring of grasping tentacles or arms. We know their modern descendants well: the swift and intelligent squid, the camouflaging masters of the octopus, the deep-dwelling vampire squid, and the beautiful chambered survivor from a bygone age, the nautilus. These modern forms are all remnants of a dynasty that was once far grander, far stranger, and far more dominant, and their story begins here, in the warm, shallow oceans of the Ordovician. The earliest cephalopods, emerging perhaps even in the late Cambrian, were likely small, unassuming creatures possessing the key innovation that would define their lineage: a shell. But unlike the simple cap-like shells of the first mollusks, the cephalopod shell was a masterpiece of buoyancy engineering. Imagine a small conical shell, like a tiny pointed wizard's hat. Inside, the creature did not occupy the entire space. Instead, as it grew, it periodically built a new wall, or septum, behind its body, sealing off a small gas-filled chamber. It would repeat this process again and again, creating a series of nested sealed chambers running the length of its shell. This was the phragmocone. But how did it control its buoyancy? The secret lay in a thin, living tube of tissue that passed through a small hole in the center of each septum, running the entire length of the chambered shell. This was the siphuncle. Through this delicate biological pipeline, the cephalopod could actively pump fluids into or out of the sealed chambers. By removing fluid, it could fill the chambers with gas, likely nitrogen, secreted from its blood, making the shell lighter and more buoyant. By adding fluid, it could make the shell heavier, allowing it to sink. This was a revolutionary invention. It was the world's first natural submarine. It freed the cephalopods from a life permanently bound to the sea floor. They could now achieve neutral buoyancy, hanging effortlessly in the water column. They could rise and fall in search of food or escape from danger, controlling their depth with subtle adjustments of gas and fluid. Armed with this incredible buoyancy device, the early cephalopods rapidly diversified. Their basic conical shell shape began to evolve. Some lineages developed curved shells, like ram's horns. Others began to coil their shells into the tight, flat spirals that would characterize their later descendants, the ammonites and the surviving nautilus. This coiling made the shell more compact, more maneuverable, and perhaps more resistant to the crushing pressures of deeper water. But one group in particular clung to that original, simple, and powerful design. They retained the ancestral, straight conical shell, and within this group, the orthocerids or straight horns, evolution would produce the first true giants of the Paleozoic era, creatures whose scale would dwarf anything else in the Ordovician seas. These were the Orthocones, and they were about to become the undisputed apex predators of their time. The invention of the chambered shell and the siphuncle was a passport to a new dimension, allowing the cephalopods to conquer the water column. And among the various lineages experimenting with this newfound freedom, one group took the ancestral straight conical design and pushed it to its absolute breathtaking limit. These were the giant Orthocones, creatures whose sheer scale dominated the Ordovician and Silurian seas for tens of millions of years. Imagine yourself floating in the warm, shallow Ordovician ocean. Sunlight filters down from above, illuminating the bustling reefs built by strange sponges and bryozoans. Trilobites scuttle across the seafloor, and the first jawed fish dart nervously through the water, and then a shadow falls over you. Moving slowly, deliberately through the water column is a living torpedo of immense proportions. Its body is a colossal, perfectly straight, gently tapering cone, stretching onwards for an almost unbelievable distance. This is one of the giant orthocone nautiloids, perhaps an Endocheirus or a Kaprosuchus. How large could they grow? The fossil evidence is staggering. While most orthocones were modest in size, perhaps a foot or two long, some lineages achieved true gigantism. We find fossilized phragmocones, the chambered conical shells, that are incomplete, broken sections, yet still measure many meters in length. Extrapolating from these fragments, paleontologists estimate that the largest of these creatures could have reached total lengths of 6 meters or 20 feet. And some more speculative, debated estimates, based on truly colossal fragments, suggest giants that might have stretched up to 9 meters or nearly 30 feet long. Picture it. A creature with a hard, pointed shell as long as a modern-day bus or a telephone pole gliding silently through the Paleozoic Sea. This was, by a huge margin, the largest animal on the planet at that time. It was the Ordovician equivalent of a great whale, a true leviathan of its age. At the wide, open end of this immense cone resided the living creature itself. We must imagine a large, squid-like head peering out, with 2 large, sophisticated eyes scanning the environment. Surrounding its mouth would have been a ring of powerful, muscular tentacles, perhaps armed with hooks or suckers, ready to grasp and manipulate its prey. But how did such a creature possibly move? How did it maneuver this colossal, rigid and unwieldy shell through the water? The answer, once again, lies in basic cephalopod engineering: jet propulsion. Like a modern squid or octopus, the orthocone would have had a muscular funnel, or hypernome, located beneath its head. By drawing water into its body cavity and then forcefully expelling it through this funnel, it could generate thrust, pushing itself backwards through the water. However, moving a 30-foot, multi-ton shell by jet propulsion would have been a slow and energetically costly affair. These giants were likely not fast, agile pursuit predators like a modern squid. They were probably slow, deliberate cruisers, perhaps ambush predators, or maybe even gentle giants that scavenged or fed on smaller, slower-moving prey near the seafloor. And simply staying level would have been a constant challenge. That long, straight shell, filled mostly with gas at the pointed end and housing the heavy, living body at the wide end, would have been inherently unstable. It would have naturally wanted to hang vertically in the water, like a fishing float. To maintain a horizontal, swimming posture, the creature would have needed to constantly adjust the fluid levels within the chambers of its shell, using its sipuncle, performing a delicate internal balancing act. It might also have used its tentacles, fanned out, as subtle control surfaces, like the fins of a submarine. Life as a giant orthocone was a masterpiece of biological engineering, a creature that had taken the simple physics of buoyancy and jet propulsion and scaled them up to an unprecedented degree. For millions of years, these colossal straight-horned cephalopods reigned as the undisputed apex predators, the silent, slow-moving kings of the Ordovician and Silurian oceans. These colossal, slow-moving titans, the giant orthocones, were more than just biological curiosities. They were the undisputed rulers of their domain, the apex predators sitting comfortably at the very top of the Ordovician and Silurian marine food webs. In a world before the evolution of large, predatory fish, let alone the great marine reptiles or whales, these shelled giants faced no serious rivals. Their sheer size was their ultimate defense, and their cephalopod intelligence combined with powerful tentacles made them formidable hunters. What did these leviathans eat? While their slow speed suggests they were not chasing down swift, agile prey, the oceans of their time offered a rich and abundant menu perfectly suited to their capabilities. Their primary targets were likely the creatures that populated the seafloor and the lower levels of the water column. The trilobites, those abundant armored arthropods, would have been a staple food source. Imagine the giant orthocone hanging almost vertically, head down, its great eyes scanning the muddy bottom. Its tentacles, extending downwards, would patiently probe the sediment, searching for the telltale shape of a hiding trilobite. Once located, the hapless creature would be seized, its hard calcite shell no match for the powerful grip and the sharp, beak-like jaws hidden within the cephalopod's mouth. The eurypterids, those formidable sea scorpions, would also have been on the menu. While some eurypterids themselves grew to impressive sizes, even the largest would have been vulnerable to a creature with a 30-foot shell. The orthocone, perhaps ambushing its prey from above or below, would use its tentacles to ensnare the sea scorpion, immobilizing its claws and tail before delivering a crushing bite. Even the first primitive jawed fish, the placoderms and acanthodians, which were just beginning their evolutionary journey, would have been potential prey. While perhaps faster than a trilobite, these early fish were often heavily armored and likely not agile enough to escape the reach of those grasping tentacles if caught unawares. How did they hunt? Given their likely slow speed and the inherent clumsiness of maneuvering that immense rigid shell, they were probably not active pursuit predators. Instead, they likely relied on ambush and opportunism. Perhaps they would hang, neutrally buoyant and nearly motionless, in the mid-water, waiting for unsuspecting prey to swim within reach. Or perhaps they employed a strategy of slow, deliberate cruising near the seabed, their tentacles acting as a sensitive, searching net, ready to grasp anything unfortunate enough to cross their path. Their large, sophisticated eyes, far more advanced than the simple light-sensing organs of most other creatures of the time, would have given them a significant advantage, allowing them to spot prey from a distance, even in the dimmer light of deeper waters. And their cephalopod intelligence, while perhaps rudimentary compared to a modern octopus, would have been leagues ahead of the trilobites and early fish they hunted, allowing them to employ simple strategies and perhaps even learn from experience. For tens of millions of years, these giant, straight-shelled cephalopods were the undisputed kings. They were the slow-moving, heavily armored battleships of the Paleozoic seas, the ultimate expression of cephalopod dominance before evolution began to favor speed, agility, and the shedding of that magnificent but ultimately burdensome external shell. Their reign was long, powerful, and absolute, but like all dynasties, it carried within it the seeds of its own eventual decline. The reign of the giant orthocones was long and undisputed. For tens of millions of years, their colossal, straight shells dominated the Paleozoic oceans, symbols of power and evolutionary success. But no dynasty lasts forever, and the very feature that defined their greatness, that magnificent, towering conical shell, eventually became their undoing. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was also a profound and ultimately fatal evolutionary burden. The problems were inherent in the design, problems that became increasingly apparent as the marine world grew more complex and competitive. The first and most obvious challenge was maneuverability. Imagine trying to navigate a dense reef system or pursue agile prey while encased in a rigid 30-foot-long pointed tube. It was like trying to pilot a zeppelin through a crowded forest. The straight shell offered little in the way of agility. Quick turns were impossible. Rapid changes in direction were difficult. While their jet propulsion allowed for straight-line movement, primarily backwards, it was a clumsy and inefficient way to navigate a complex three-dimensional world, as faster, more agile swimmers began to evolve. First, the early jawed fish, and later, the more advanced bony fish and sharks. The slow, deliberate orthocones would have found themselves increasingly outmaneuvered, both as hunters and as potential prey. Their size offered protection, but their lack of speed and agility made them vulnerable. The second problem was hydrodynamics. That long, straight cone, while simple, was not a particularly efficient shape for moving through water. It created significant drag, requiring immense energy expenditure just to push its bulk through the ocean. As competition for resources intensified, this inherent inefficiency became a significant disadvantage. Creatures that could move further, faster, and with less effort would have a distinct edge. And perhaps the most fundamental limitation was the very nature of the external shell itself. While offering protection, it also imposed a rigid constraint on the creature's lifestyle and evolution. The need to build, maintain, and carry this massive, cumbersome structure consumed vast amounts of metabolic energy. It limited the depths they could safely inhabit, as the gas-filled chambers were vulnerable to implosion under extreme pressure, and it tethered their evolutionary potential to the simple physics of managing a large, external flotation device. Evolution, in its relentless search for efficiency and advantage, began to favor different solutions within the cephalopod lineage itself. The future lay not in the straight line, but in the curve. Other groups of cephalopods, like the ammonites, had embraced the coiled shell design. A tightly coiled shell was far more compact, more robust, and significantly more maneuverable than a long, straight cone. It allowed for greater agility, faster swimming, and perhaps access to different ecological niches. As the Paleozoic era progressed, the coiled ammonites exploded in diversity, filling the oceans with an astonishing array of shapes and sizes, while the straight-shelled orthocones began a slow, steady decline. And another, even more radical solution was emerging: losing the shell altogether or internalizing it. This path would eventually lead to the modern squid and octopus, creatures that traded the heavy burden of external armor for the liberating advantages of speed, intelligence, and unparalleled camouflage. They became masters of jet propulsion, their soft, flexible bodies capable of lightning-fast bursts of speed and incredible agility that their shelled ancestors could only have dreamed of. The giant Orthocones were magnificent pioneers. They were the first creatures to truly conquer the vertical dimension of the ocean, the first to achieve truly colossal size. But their very success was tied to a specific set of environmental conditions and a relatively simple ecological landscape. As the world changed, as the oceans became more crowded, more competitive, and filled with faster, more agile players, their beautiful, but ultimately burdensome straight shells became an anchor, pulling them slowly down into the depths of extinction. Their reign faded, leaving behind only the fossilized echoes of their colossal forms, silent reminders of a time when giants wore their skeletons like magnificent, straight horns reaching for an ancient sky. The reign of the giant orthocones is long over. Their colossal forms no longer glide through the silent depths. But they did not vanish without a trace. They left behind echoes, magnificent and enduring messages written in the very fabric of the planet. Their legacy endures in the fossil record, in the great stone horns that weather out of ancient seabeds, offering us tangible proof of their once unrivaled dominion. Finding the fossil of a giant orthocone is a fundamentally different experience than finding the delicate impression of an Ediacaran frond or the intricate skeleton of a dinosaur. These were creatures built in large part of solid, durable mineral. Their shells, composed of calcium carbonate, were essentially rocks even during their lives, and after death, Under the right conditions, these shells could persist for hundreds of millions of years, becoming part of the geological landscape itself. Imagine walking through a landscape that was once the floor of a shallow Ordovician sea, perhaps a limestone quarry in Scandinavia, a creek bed in Ohio, or a mountainside in Morocco. You might see, embedded in the rock or perhaps lying loose upon the surface, what appears to be a long, smooth, gently tapering stone. It might look at first glance like a petrified log, or perhaps just an unusually shaped piece of rock. But as you look closer, you notice the details. You see the faint, horizontal lines marking the septa, the ancient walls that once divided the gas-filled chambers. You might see the smooth, sometimes polished surface of the shell itself. And if you are lucky enough to find a broken section, you might glimpse the hollow chambers within, perhaps filled with sparkling calcite crystals that grew there over the eons. And running down the very center, you might find the fossilized remnant of the siphuncle, that delicate, vital tube that once regulated the creature's buoyancy. These are the phragmocones, the chambered shells, the most common and enduring remnants of the orthocones. Because they were so large, so robust, and so widespread, their fossils are surprisingly common in rocks of the right age around the world. They are silent, stony monuments to the age of straight-shelled giants. Sometimes these fossils are found in extraordinary abundance, concentrated in graveyards. These likely represent mass mortality events, perhaps caused by sudden changes in ocean chemistry, temperature shifts, or perhaps even vast, synchronized, post-mating die-offs, similar to what we see in some modern squid. These fossil beds offer a haunting glimpse into the sheer numbers in which these creatures once existed. What do these stone echoes tell us about the lives of the giants? Their sheer size, of course, speaks volumes about the productivity and relative lack of large predators in the Ordovician and Silurian seas. Their global distribution tells us that these were highly successful creatures, capable of colonizing oceans across the planet. The subtle variations in their shell shape and ornamentation hint at a diversity within the group that we are only beginning to understand. And the shells themselves, studied under a microscope, can reveal secrets about their growth patterns, their lifespan, perhaps even the chemistry of the ancient oceans they inhabited. Like the growth rings of a tree, the layers of the shell hold a silent, chemical record of the world. These great stone horns weathering out of hillsides and riverbeds are more than just geological curiosities. They are time capsules. They are the tangible remains of the first true giants to rule the oceans, the silent, slow-moving kings of a world 500 million years lost. They are a reminder that dominance is fleeting, that even the most successful designs eventually give way, and that the history of life is written not just in faint impressions, but sometimes in colossal, enduring stone. Our journey now takes a great leap forward across the most profound boundary in the history of complex life. We leave behind the ancient Paleozoic era, the world of the first forests, the giant insects, and the straight-horned cephalopods. We cross the fiery chasm of the Permian Triassic extinction, the Great Dying, that cataclysmic event that wiped the slate almost clean. And we emerge, blinking, into the dawn of a new era, the Mesozoic, the Middle Life, the age best known as the Age of Reptiles. Our first stop in this new world is the Triassic period, beginning roughly 252 million years ago. This was a time of recovery, of rebuilding, a strange and often harsh chapter where life, having been pushed to the very brink of annihilation, began its slow, tentative, and sometimes bizarre journey back. Imagine a world profoundly different from the lush, swampy Carboniferous or the diverse, reef-filled Ordovician. The planet itself is still largely assembled into the single supercontinent of Pangaea, and this vast, unbroken landmass creates a climate of extreme contrasts. The coastal regions might be humid and monsoonal, But the immense interior is a vast, arid desert, perhaps the largest desert the world has ever known. It is a world painted in shades of red rock, dune fields and sparse, hardy vegetation. The great forests of the coal swamps are gone, replaced by tougher, more drought-resistant plants like conifers, cycads and ginkgos. The air is thinner now, oxygen levels closer to modern values, perhaps even a bit lower for a time. The world is generally warm, a greenhouse climate returning after the cool of the late Paleozoic, but it is a dry, harsh warmth. And in this recovering world, the survivors of the Great Dying are beginning to diversify, radiating out into the countless empty ecological niches left vacant by the extinction. On land, the dominant players are no longer the strange amphibians and early mammal relatives that had ruled the Permian. A new dynasty is quietly beginning its ascent, the Archosaurs. This group includes the ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and, most significantly, the first small bipedal creatures that would eventually give rise to the dinosaurs. The true giants of the dinosaur age have not yet arrived, but their humble beginnings are here. The oceans, too, are recovering. The diverse reefs of the Paleozoic are gone, wiped out by the extinction. New forms of coral are only just beginning their slow work of rebuilding. The seas are dominated for a time by vast numbers of just a few hardy, disaster-adapted species, like the clam-like Claria. But amidst this apparent emptiness, a new kind of predator is emerging, taking advantage of the vacant niches left by the vanished sea scorpions and giant cephalopods. The marine reptiles are beginning their first great invasion of the sea. Strange, lizard-like nothosaurs, dolphin-shaped ichthyosaurs, and heavily armored placodonts are venturing back into the water, establishing new dynasties that will rule the oceans for the next 150 million years. This Triassic world is a strange, transitional landscape, a bridge between the ancient world and the world of the dinosaurs. It is a time of evolutionary experimentation, an era that produced some of the most bizarre and unexpected reptilian forms that have ever lived. And it is here, along the shallow coastal lagoons of this recovering world, perhaps in what is now Europe or China, that we find our next forgotten creature. A reptile so strange, so improbable in its very design, that its discovery would baffle scientists for decades, forcing them to reconsider the very limits of anatomical possibility. This was the creature with the miracle neck. The story of how Tanystropheus came to be known by science is a perfect illustration of how the fossil record often delivers its secrets in fragments, pieces of a puzzle that can take generations to assemble correctly. Its discovery was not a single triumphant moment, but a slow, confusing, and often misleading process that began in the mid-19th century. The first clues emerged not as a complete skeleton, but as isolated, perplexing bones weathering out of Triassic rock layers in Europe, particularly in Germany and Switzerland. These were strange, elongated, hollow bones, sometimes quite large. Paleontologists of the time, working with a still incomplete understanding of the sheer diversity of ancient reptiles, struggled to make sense of them. What could they be? Their length and hollow nature led some early researchers to suggest they might be the limb bones of some large unknown reptile. Others, noting their slenderness, proposed a more exotic identity. Perhaps they were the enormously elongated finger bones that supported the leathery wings of a pterosaur, those flying reptiles that were just beginning to be understood. For a time, these strange, isolated tubes were catalogued under names reflecting this uncertainty, sometimes tentatively assigned to the flying reptile group. It wasn't until the early 20th century that more complete skeletons began to emerge, particularly from the rich fossil beds of Monte San Giorgio on the border between Switzerland and Italy. This UNESCO World Heritage Site preserves an incredible snapshot of life in a shallow tropical lagoon during the Middle Triassic period. And here, articulated skeletons were found that finally revealed the true and utterly bizarre nature of the creature to which those long bones belonged. The bones were not wing fingers, they were not leg bones, they were neck vertebrae, and they were vertebrae unlike any seen before or since. The creature possessed a neck that was astonishingly, almost comically, long, a neck that was often longer than its entire body and tail combined, a neck that seemed to defy the very laws of biomechanics. Imagine the scene in the laboratory as paleontologists carefully chipped away the stone, revealing this impossible anatomy. A relatively small, lizard-like body, perhaps 6 feet long, and attached to it, stretching forward for another 10 feet or more, was this incredibly slender, rod-like neck. It was less a neck and more a biological fishing pole. The initial confusion was understandable. How could such a structure possibly function? How could a creature support, let alone move, a neck 3 times the length of its own torso? The discovery immediately posed a host of baffling questions. Was it a land creature? Was it aquatic? How did it hold its head up? How did it eat? The creature was formally named Tanystropheus in 1852 by the German paleontologist Christian Erich Hermann von Meyer. The name, derived from Greek, means long vertebra, a simple, accurate, yet profoundly understated description for one of the most anatomically extreme vertebrates that has ever lived. The early reconstructions, even after the neck was correctly identified, were often awkward, depicting the creature holding its immense neck high in the air like a reptilian giraffe, a posture that seemed physically implausible given the likely weight and structure. The true nature of its life, its habits, and the function of that incredible neck would require decades more study, more fossils, and a willingness to imagine a lifestyle that was as strange and unique as the creature itself. The puzzle had been identified, but its solution was still a long way off. Let us now focus our attention entirely on this one defining and utterly baffling feature, the neck of Tanystropheus. It is the creature's signature, its claim to evolutionary fame, and the source of its enduring mystery. It is a structure that seems less like a product of natural selection and more like something imagined, a biological absurdity brought to life. Imagine the creature again, a total length of perhaps 20 feet or 6 meters from the tip of its snout to the end of its tail. And of that 20 feet, fully half, or 10 feet, 3 meters, is neck. It possessed one of the longest necks relative to its body size of any animal that has ever lived, rivaled perhaps only by some of the colossal, long-necked sauropod dinosaurs. But the true, underlying strangeness is not just its length, it is its construction. If you look at the neck of a giraffe, another champion of cervical elongation, its great height is achieved by having 7 standard-issue mammalian neck vertebrae, but each one is stretched to an enormous length. If you look at the elegant serpentine neck of a plesiosaur, those great marine reptiles, their flexibility came from having an immense number of vertebrae, sometimes 70 or more, each one relatively short, creating a structure like a long, bony pearl necklace. Tanystropheus did neither of these things. Its incredible 10-foot neck was built from just 12 or 13 individual vertebrae. That is only slightly more than the 7 found in your own neck or a giraffe's. This means that each individual neck bone in Tanystropheus was extraordinarily elongated, like a series of hollow, bony flutes laid end to end. This sparse construction, this small number of greatly stretched bones, immediately tells us something crucial about the neck's function. It tells us that this was not a flexible, snake-like structure. Unlike the multi-jointed neck of a plesiosaur, which could likely bend and dart in almost any direction, the neck of Tanystropheus, with its few elongated vertebrae, would have been remarkably stiff. Think of it less like a graceful swan's neck, and more like a long, rigid pole with only limited points of flexion, perhaps primarily at the very base where it joined the body, and near the small head at the very tip. It was not built for graceful curves, it was built for reach. And how did it support this immense 10-foot pole extending from its body? The vertebrae themselves were surprisingly lightweight, extensively hollowed out, perhaps filled with air sacs connected to its respiratory system, similar to the pneumatic bones we saw in the theropod dinosaurs. The neck muscles, anchored to specialized elongated ribs extending back from the neck vertebrae, would have acted like the tension cables on a great construction crane, providing the strength to hold the neck aloft, at least partially. But even with these weight-saving adaptations, the biomechanics remain challenging. Could it truly have held that immense neck high in the air for extended periods? Many modern reconstructions suggest a different posture. Perhaps it held its neck more horizontally, extending straight out from its body, especially if it spent much of its time in the water, where buoyancy could help support the weight. This structure, this long, stiff, lightweight pole built from just a handful of elongated bones, dictates almost everything else about the creature's probable lifestyle. It tells us it was likely not a fast, agile swimmer chasing down prey in open water. It suggests it was not a grazer reaching high into trees like a giraffe. It points instead towards a life lived at the boundary, a creature perfectly and bizarrely adapted to exploit the unique opportunities found at the edge of the land and the sea. The neck was not just a strange feature, it was the key to its entire forgotten way of life. That incredible, stiff, 10-foot pole of a neck was not a biological indulgence. It was a tool exquisitely evolved for a very specific lifestyle, in a very specific environment. The bones of Tanystropheus, found so beautifully preserved in the lagoons of Monte San Giorgio and other similar sites, paint a picture not of an open ocean swimmer, nor a purely terrestrial creature, but of an ambush predator living along the shoreline. Let us reconstruct this world. Imagine the coast of the Tethys Ocean during the Middle Triassic period. It is a warm, tropical environment. The boundary between land and sea is not a sharp, clean line, but a complex, marshy and shallow transition zone. Perhaps low-lying islands are fringed by mangrove-like swamps. Shallow, clear lagoons protected from the open ocean by sandbars or primitive reefs teem with life. The water is warm, salty, and full of small fish and swimming invertebrates. And it is here, in this boundary world, that Tanystropheus likely spent its days. Its relatively small body, perhaps 6 feet long, with sturdy, though not particularly powerful limbs, suggests a creature that was comfortable both on land and in the water. It was likely semi-aquatic. We can picture it resting near the water's edge, perhaps partially submerged in the shallows, its body hidden amongst the coastal vegetation or the submerged rocks. It would have been a creature of patience, capable of remaining still for long periods, like a modern heron waiting for its prey. Its weapon, its advantage, was its reach. That colossal stiff neck was, in essence, a biological fishing rod. From its hidden position at the water's edge, Tanystropheus could extend that incredible neck far out over the lagoon. Its small head, equipped with sharp, interlocking, pointed teeth, perfect for grasping slippery prey, would hang suspended, almost invisibly, above the clear water. It would wait, motionless, its head perhaps held just above the surface, or maybe even dipped slightly below, its eyes scanning the depths. And when an unsuspecting fish, or perhaps a small swimming reptile, or one of the abundant shelled cephalopods of the Triassic seas, ventured too close, the attack would have been swift and precise. Not with a serpentine lunge of the entire neck, the structure was too stiff for that, but perhaps with a sudden darting strike of the head itself, powered by the muscles at the very tip of that long pole. or perhaps with a quick sideways snap of the jaws. The prey, grasped firmly in those needle-like teeth, would then be lifted clear of the water and maneuvered back towards the shore, swallowed whole by the patient hunter. This lifestyle elegantly solves many of the biomechanical puzzles posed by that extraordinary neck. By living primarily at the water's edge, Tanystropheus could use the buoyancy of the water to help support the immense weight of its neck when hunting. By remaining relatively still, anchored by its body on the shore or in the shallows, it minimized the stress and strain on those elongated vertebrae. And by specializing in small aquatic prey, it avoided the need for powerful, crushing jaws or complex chewing mechanisms. It was a creature perfectly adapted to plucking small meals from a safe distance. Some fossils even preserve the ghostly outlines of stomach contents, confirming this diet of fish and cephalopods. And incredibly, some specimens have been found with their long tails mysteriously missing, cleanly severed as if bitten off by a larger predator. This hints that Tanystropheus itself was not at the top of the food chain. Perhaps while it patiently fished with its head far out in the lagoon, its vulnerable hindquarters, resting near the shore, were occasionally ambushed by the large crocodile-like phytosaurs or other predators that shared its Triassic world. It was a life lived on the edge, a creature of two worlds, using its bizarre, improbable anatomy to carve out a unique and successful niche for millions of years. It was a testament to evolution's ability to find radical solutions, to push the boundaries of form and function in the endless quest for survival. The image is captivating, a creature half hidden at the water's edge, its body resting on land or in the shallowest verge, while its impossibly long neck extends far out, suspending a small, waiting head above the clear lagoon waters. It is a picture of patience, of stillness, of a predator perfectly adapted to strike from an unexpected distance. But how, exactly, did it hunt? What were the precise mechanics of using a 10-foot, relatively stiff pole to catch small, fast-moving aquatic prey? The key likely lies in minimizing movement and maximizing surprise. Tanystropheus was almost certainly an ambush predator. Its strategy was not one of pursuit, but of deception and sudden, localized action. Imagine the view from beneath the water's surface. Small fish swim amongst the seaweed and submerged rocks. Ammonites, with their coiled shells, jet gently through the water. The world is teeming with life. High above, suspended near the surface, is the small, slender head of Tanystropheus. Seen from below against the bright, shimmering surface, it would have cast a minimal shadow. Its thin profile would have made it difficult to spot. It was biological camouflage, achieved through sheer, improbable geometry. The stiffness of the neck, which seems like a disadvantage, may have actually been crucial to this strategy. A long, flexible neck, like that of a plesiosaur, requires constant, energy-consuming muscular effort to hold steady. But the rigid, pole-like neck of Tanystropheus, supported perhaps by specialized ligaments or fused vertebrae, might have allowed it to maintain its position for hours with minimal effort. It could simply rest its head in position, waiting, conserving energy, becoming part of the landscape. And when the moment came, when an unwary fish strayed into the striking zone, the attack was likely initiated not by a large, sweeping movement of the entire neck, but by the head and the very front portion of the neck itself. The skull of Tanystropheus was lightly built, its jaws long and slender, lined with those sharp, interlocking, conical teeth. These were not the jaws of a crusher, but the jaws of a snapper, designed for a quick, precise grabbing motion. Perhaps it employed a sit-and-wait strategy, simply waiting for prey to swim directly beneath its suspended head and then striking downwards with a rapid, vertical snap of the jaws. Or perhaps it engaged in a more subtle form of stalking, using tiny, almost imperceptible movements of the very tip of its neck to slowly maneuver its head into the perfect position before the final, lightning-fast lunge. The interlocking nature of its teeth suggests they were primarily for grasping slippery prey, not for tearing or chewing. Like many modern fish-eating reptiles, Tanystropheus likely swallowed its meals whole, lifting its catch clear of the water with that long neck and then letting gravity help slide the fish down its immensely long esophagus. Could it have hunted on land as well? Its sturdy legs suggest it was capable of moving on land, perhaps slowly and awkwardly. Its sharp teeth would certainly have been effective against small lizards or large insects, but the sheer biomechanical challenge of maneuvering that immense neck in the full force of gravity, outside the supportive buoyancy of water, makes a primarily terrestrial hunting strategy seem less likely. The shoreline lagoon was its perfect arena, the place where its bizarre anatomy transformed from a liability into a unique and powerful advantage. It was a creature that had found a loophole in the rules of physics, using its extraordinary reach to decouple its large, vulnerable body from the dangerous, dynamic world where its small, fast prey lived. It was a fisherman, pure and simple, and its fishing rod was its own, unbelievable neck. But like all specialized tools, this incredible adaptation also carried a hidden cost, a vulnerability that would perhaps contribute to its eventual disappearance. For millions of years, through the middle part of the Triassic period, Tanystropheus seems to have been a remarkably successful creature. Its fossils, particularly in the rich marine deposits of Europe and China, show that it was a common and widespread inhabitant of those ancient coastal lagoons. Its bizarre, highly specialized anatomy, that improbable neck, was clearly not a biological mistake, but a winning formula, at least for a time. It had carved out a unique niche, becoming the patient, long-reaching fisherman of the shallow seas. It shared its world with the first, small dinosaurs venturing onto land, the strange, armored placodonts grubbing for shellfish on the seabed, and the sleek, dolphin-like ichthyosaurs beginning their mastery of the open ocean. It was a time of transition, a world finding its footing after the great Permian extinction, and Tanystropheus was one of its most distinctive inhabitants. And then, as the Triassic period drew to a close, around 201 million years ago, it vanishes. Like so many of the strange, experimental reptiles of the Triassic, Tanystropheus does not seem to survive the end of the period. The fossil record falls silent. Its long-necked ghost disappears from the rock layers that mark the beginning of the subsequent Jurassic period. Why did it disappear? What brought an end to the reign of this creature with the miracle neck? There was another significant extinction event at the boundary between the Triassic and Jurassic periods. While not as catastrophic as the Great Dying that preceded it, this event saw major turnovers in life, particularly among large amphibians and many groups of reptiles. The exact causes are still debated. Perhaps massive volcanic eruptions associated with the breakup of Pangaea, perhaps climate change, perhaps sea level fluctuations, but the result was a significant reshuffling of the ecological deck. Could Tanystropheus have been a victim of this end Triassic extinction? It seems likely. Perhaps the environmental changes disrupted the coastal lagoon habitats it depended upon. Perhaps shifts in ocean chemistry affected its primary food sources, the small fish and cephalopods. A creature so highly specialized, so perfectly adapted to one particular way of life, is often exquisitely vulnerable when that way of life is suddenly altered. Its greatest strength, that unique neck, may have also been its greatest weakness, locking it into an ecological corner from which it could not escape when conditions changed. Or perhaps its disappearance was driven less by environmental change and more by biological competition. As the Triassic gave way to the Jurassic, new, more advanced groups of marine reptiles were rapidly evolving and diversifying. The plesiosaurs, with their powerful flippers, flexible necks, achieved through many vertebrae, not just a few elongated ones, and more robust bodies, were becoming increasingly dominant. These creatures were faster, more agile, and perhaps simply more efficient hunters in the evolving marine ecosystems. Could the plesiosaurs and other newly emerging marine predators have simply outcompeted Tanystropheus for food? Or perhaps could they have even begun to prey upon the long-necked reptile itself? That 10-foot, relatively stiff neck, while a brilliant tool for ambushing small prey, would have been a significant liability, a vulnerable target, when faced with a large, fast and powerful predator attacking from the open water. We may never know the precise reason for its demise. Perhaps it was a combination of factors, a changing climate, shrinking habitats, and the rise of new, more formidable competitors. What is clear is that the unique evolutionary moment that allowed for the existence of Tanystropheus had passed. Its strange, beautiful, and ultimately extreme adaptation, that miracle neck, represented a pathway that life would explore for a time and then abandon. It left behind no direct descendants. It was another fascinating but ultimately closed chapter in the great book of evolution. Its fossils remain, silent monuments in stone, challenging our notions of anatomical possibility, and reminding us that the history of life is filled not just with the ancestors of the familiar, but with countless forgotten forms, each one a unique and unrepeatable solution to the endless puzzle of survival. Our journey takes another significant leap forward, leaving the transitional world of the Triassic behind and plunging into the heart of the Cretaceous period, the final dramatic act in the long reign of the dinosaurs. We travel now to a specific place and time, North Africa, roughly 95 million years ago. This is not the arid desert landscape we associate with the Sahara today. Imagine instead a world vastly different, a landscape dominated by immense meandering river systems, vast floodplains, and lush tropical mangrove-like swamps. The climate is hot, humid, and teeming with life on a scale that almost defies belief. This is the land of giants. The rivers themselves are colossal, perhaps wider and deeper than the modern Amazon, and they are home to aquatic monsters. Giant, primitive fish like Onchopristis, a sawfish relative reaching lengths of over 25 feet, cruise through the murky waters. Lurking in the depths are enormous car-sized coelacanths, and ruling over all of them is perhaps the largest freshwater predator of all time, the sail-backed, crocodile-snouted dinosaur, Spinosaurus, a creature even larger than T-Rex, perfectly adapted for hunting in these immense river systems. On the floodplains bordering these great rivers, the terrestrial giants roam. Herds of long-necked sauropods like Paralititan browse the treetops, and stalking them is one of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs ever discovered, the great shark-toothed Carcharodontosaurus, a predator rivaling T-Rex in size and ferocity. This was an ecosystem operating at the extremes of scale, a world where big was the baseline. It was a time and place of intense biological productivity, fueled by the warm climate and the rich nutrients carried by the great rivers. And amidst this cast of titanic dinosaurs and monstrous fish, another, equally ancient lineage was undergoing its own remarkable diversification. These were the crocodilomorphs, the group that includes modern crocodiles, alligators, caimans, and gharials, but which, back in the Cretaceous, was far more diverse and experimental than the semi-aquatic ambush predators we know today. The Cretaceous was a golden age for these crocodile relatives. They weren't just confined to the water's edge. They explored a dazzling array of forms and lifestyles. There were small, fast-running, land-dwelling forms that chased down prey like reptilian dogs. There were bizarre, pug-nosed herbivores with complex grinding teeth, perhaps living like prehistoric hippos. There were fully marine forms with paddle-like limbs and fish-catching snouts. The familiar, low-slung, patient river lurker of today was just one successful model among many. The crocodilomorphs of the Cretaceous were a dynasty in their own right, filling niches that seem utterly alien to our modern conception of a crocodile. And it is here, in this supersized world of giant dinosaurs and experimental crocs, amidst the hot, humid swamps and riverbanks of Cretaceous North Africa, that paleontologists unearthed the skull of a creature that seemed to embody the fierce, predatory spirit of its age, yet possessed a set of features so strange, so unexpected, that it immediately stood apart from all its relatives. This was the creature they would call the Boar Croc. Before we meet our fourth forgotten creature face to face, we must pause for a moment and recalibrate our very image of what a crocodile is. When we picture one today, our mind conjures a very specific and very successful blueprint. A low-slung, heavily armored, semi-aquatic ambush predator. A creature of patience, lying log-like and nearly invisible at the water's edge, waiting for an unsuspecting animal to come within range of its powerful, snapping jaws. This is the modern crocodilian, a master of its particular niche, a survivor whose basic design has endured for millions of years. But this familiar form represents only a tiny surviving fraction of a lineage that was once far more diverse, far more experimental, and far more ecologically adventurous. The Cretaceous period, the very world that Kaprosuchus inhabited, was the golden age of the crocodilomorphs, and they came in shapes and sizes that would seem utterly fantastical to us today. Imagine leaving the familiar riverbank behind and venturing inland into the forests and plains of the Cretaceous continents. Here, you might encounter creatures like Prehistoric, small, lightly built crocodilomorphs with long, slender legs held directly under their bodies, not sprawling out to the sides. These were not slow, lumbering waddlers. They were fast, agile, terrestrial runners, perhaps chasing down insects, small mammals, or even baby dinosaurs like reptilian greyhounds. In other parts of the world, perhaps South America, you might find even stranger forms, creatures like Orthocones, with short pug-like snouts and complex, multi-cusped teeth that look remarkably like those of a modern mammal. Some paleontologists suggest these bizarre crocs might have been herbivores or perhaps omnivores, using their specialized teeth to grind tough plant matter or crush insects and snails. Imagine a creature with the body of a crocodile, but the head and perhaps the lifestyle of a prehistoric pig. Returning to the water's edge, even the aquatic forms showed incredible diversity. There were creatures like Stomatosuchus, another giant from Cretaceous Africa, known only from a single enormous skull, tragically destroyed in World War II. This creature had a flattened pelican-like snout, perhaps suggesting it was a filter feeder, gulping down mouthfuls of water and straining out small fish, like a reptilian baleen whale. And in the oceans, the crocodilomorphs embarked on their own great marine adventure. Creatures like the metriorhynchids shed their heavy armor, transformed their limbs into paddle-like flippers, and evolved powerful fish-like tails. They became sleek, streamlined, open-ocean predators, pursuing fish and ammonites with dolphin-like speed and agility. This incredible diversity tells us something crucial. The modern crocodilian, the patient riverbank ambusher, is not the only way to be a successful crocodilomorph. It is simply the surviving way. Back in the Cretaceous, this ancient lineage was exploring a vast landscape of ecological possibility, testing the limits of its own adaptable body plan. It is into this context, this world of running crocs, herbivorous crocs, pelican crocs, and dolphin crocs, that we must place our next forgotten creature. It was not just another variation on the familiar theme. It was something else entirely. It was a predator built with a unique and terrifying set of weapons, a creature whose discovery would add yet another fearsome face to the already diverse gallery of Cretaceous crocodilomorphs. It was discovered in the heart of the Sahara, and it earned its nickname for a very good reason. The story of our fourth forgotten creature emerges, like so many paleontological treasures, from one of the most unlikely and inhospitable landscapes on Earth: the vast, sun-scorched expanse of the Sahara Desert. Today it is a realm of endless sand and rock, one of the driest places on the planet. But 95 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period, this same region was a lush, wet and dangerous world, dissected by immense river systems teeming with giants. It was into this ancient buried world that the paleontologist Paul Sereno from the University of Chicago led expeditions in the early 2000s. Sereno and his team were no strangers to the Sahara's prehistoric secrets. They had already unearthed spectacular fossils of giant dinosaurs like Carcharodontosaurus and Spinosaurus from these same rock layers, known as the Echkar Formation, in modern-day Niger and Morocco. They knew this was a place where monsters had once roamed. But even amidst the colossal bones of dinosaurs, the rocks yielded remains of another, equally fascinating group: the diverse and often bizarre crocodilomorphs that shared this supersized ecosystem. Sereno's team uncovered fossils of strange plant-eating crocs with buck teeth, rat croc; flat-snouted crocs resembling giant pancakes, pancake croc; and long-legged terrestrial runners, dog croc. It was clear that the crocodile family tree here was far more complex than just the river-dwelling giants. And then they found a skull unlike any other. It was discovered in Niger, emerging slowly from the ancient consolidated river sediments. It was not flattened or distorted, but remarkably complete and three-dimensional. It was instantly recognizable as a crocodilomorph skull, with the characteristic long snout and the placement of the nostrils high up, hinting at a connection to water. But this skull possessed a set of features so extreme, so unlike any known crocodile, living or extinct, that it immediately commanded attention. The skull was deep, robust, and heavily armored, suggesting a creature of immense power. The eye sockets were not positioned on the top of the skull, like a modern crocodile waiting patiently at the water surface. Instead, they were oriented partially forwards, suggesting binocular vision, the kind of depth perception crucial for a predator that actively targets and pursues its prey, perhaps even on land. But the most astonishing and frankly terrifying feature was its teeth. This creature was armed with weaponry that seemed almost absurdly oversized. Projecting downwards from its upper jaw and upwards from its lower jaw were 3 pairs of enormous tusk-like teeth. They were not conical like the typical prey-gripping teeth of a crocodile. They were flattened side to side, sharp-edged, and interlocked like daggers when the mouth was closed. And they were huge, extending far beyond the margins of the jaw, visible even when the mouth was shut tight. These were not teeth for simply grabbing and drowning. These were teeth for stabbing, for piercing, for delivering a devastating bone-crunching bite. Paul Sereno, struck by the resemblance of these incredible tusks to those of a wild boar, gave the creature its unforgettable nickname, the Boar Croc. Its formal scientific name became Kaprosuchus saharicus. Kapros is Greek for boar, and suchus is Greek for crocodile. Saharicus, of course, refers to the Sahara Desert where its remains were found. This single, spectacular skull, unearthed from the 95-million-year-old riverbeds of Africa, opened a window onto a new kind of Cretaceous predator. It was clearly a crocodilomorph, but one that seemed built for a far more aggressive, perhaps even terrestrial, style of hunting than its modern relatives. The boar croc was not a patient ambusher. It looked like a brawler, a reptilian attack dog armed with tusks. and those teeth, those incredible oversized daggers, became the immediate focus of intense scientific speculation. Let us now focus entirely on the feature that gives Kaprosuchus its name and its fearsome reputation: those extraordinary teeth. They are the defining characteristic of the Boar Croc, a dental arsenal unlike almost anything else seen in the long history of the crocodilomorph lineage. They hint at a lifestyle far removed from the simple grab-and-drown tactics of its modern cousins. Imagine that robust, heavily armored skull again, and protruding from it, violating the sleek profile we expect from a crocodile, are those 3 pairs of tusks. The first pair, and perhaps the most visually striking, originated from the very front of the upper jaw, the premaxilla. These teeth pointed almost straight downwards, long, sharp, and slightly curved, extending well below the line of the lower jaw even when the mouth was closed. They formed a terrifying cage at the very tip of the snout. The second pair erupted from near the middle of the upper jaw, the maxilla. These were perhaps the largest of all, flattened side to side like thick knife blades, pointing downwards and slightly outwards. And mirroring them from below, the third pair arose from the front of the lower jaw, the dentary bone. These were equally massive, pointing straight upwards, fitting neatly into notches on the upper jaw when the mouth was closed, their tips likely extending above the top of the snout itself. When the mouth snapped shut, these 6 great tusks would interlock, creating a deadly, bone-shearing vice. This was not the dentition of a creature designed for delicately plucking fish from the water. This was the dentition of a creature built for impact, for power, for grappling with large and potentially dangerous prey. What then was the purpose of these incredible tusks? Paul Sereno, in his initial description, suggested several possibilities, painting a picture of a truly formidable predator. Perhaps the front pair, those downward-pointing tusks at the tip of the snout, were used like the canines of a saber-toothed cat, for delivering a deep, puncturing, killing bite to the throat or neck of its victim. The larger blade-like tusks further back in the jaw might have been used for shearing through flesh and bone, or perhaps even for ramming or slashing attacks. Sereno vividly imagined Kaprosuchus potentially ramming its heavily armored snout into the flank of a dinosaur, using those upper tusks like the horns of a battering ram. And the upward-pointing tusks of the lower jaw, they would have provided the opposing force, trapping the prey, preventing escape, and driving the upper tusks deeper with every bite. This interlocking, tusk-like arrangement also suggests a different kind of bite compared to modern crocodiles. A typical crocodile bite is immensely powerful, but primarily designed for crushing and holding. The jaws clamp down, and the conical teeth prevent escape while the animal drags its prey into the water to drown. Kaprosuchus's bite seems geared towards something quicker, more decisive, perhaps involving a powerful upward thrust of the head upon closing the jaws, driving those lower tusks deep into the victim. Were these tusks also used for display, perhaps for intimidating rivals or attracting mates? It's certainly possible. Such extreme structures in the animal kingdom often serve a dual purpose, acting both as weapons and as signals of strength and fitness. One can easily imagine 2 male Kaprosuchus facing off, their mouths agape, displaying their fearsome dental weaponry in a ritualistic contest of dominance. But their primary function seems undeniably predatory. These were tools designed to inflict massive trauma, to quickly subdue and dispatch large prey. They speak of a creature that was not content to wait patiently at the water's edge. They speak of a hunter that was capable of engaging in direct, violent confrontation. And this leads directly to the most intriguing question of all. Where did Kaprosuchus hunt? Was it confined to the water, or did these tusks, combined with other features of its skull, hint at a far more terrestrial and far more terrifying possibility? The skull of Kaprosuchus, with its formidable tusks and robust construction, paints a picture of a powerful predator, but it is another subtler feature that truly ignites the imagination and hints at a lifestyle radically different from its modern relatives. This clue lies in the placement of its eyes. Look closely at the skull of a modern crocodile or alligator. Its eyes are positioned high up on the top of its head, almost like periscopes. This is the perfect adaptation for its signature hunting style, lying submerged and nearly invisible at the water's surface, only its eyes and nostrils breaking the waterline, patiently watching the shore for unsuspecting prey. The eyes of Kaprosuchus, however, tell a different story. They are not positioned dorsally, looking upwards. Instead, they are oriented laterally on the sides of the skull, but rotated significantly forwards. They face outwards and forwards, giving the creature something that a modern crocodile largely lacks: binocular vision. Binocular vision, where the fields of view from both eyes overlap, is the key to depth perception. It is the crucial adaptation for predators that need to accurately judge distances, to track moving targets, and to execute precise strikes. Think of a hawk, an owl, a cat, or even ourselves. Our forward-facing eyes give us the three-dimensional view necessary for navigating complex environments and capturing agile prey. Why would a creature that hunted primarily by ambushing animals at the water's edge need such sophisticated forward-facing vision? The traditional crocodile strategy relies more on stealth, proximity, and a sudden explosive lunge, not on the precise distance-judging calculations of a pursuit predator. This single anatomical detail, the placement of the eyes, opened the door to a thrilling and somewhat terrifying hypothesis. What if Kaprosuchus was not primarily an aquatic ambusher? What if it spent a significant amount of its time out of the water? What if it was a terrestrial hunter? Paul Sereno, the discoverer of Kaprosuchus, strongly advocated for this interpretation. He envisioned a creature far more agile and active on land than any modern crocodile. While we haven't yet found the post-cranial skeleton of Kaprosuchus, the bones of its body and limbs, many other crocodilomorphs from the Cretaceous period are known to have possessed long, slender legs held directly under their bodies, adaptations for efficient running. If Kaprosuchus shared this body plan, it would have been capable of surprising bursts of speed on land. Now, let us assemble this new picture. Imagine a creature perhaps 20 feet or 6 meters long. It is built like a crocodile, but with longer, more upright legs. Its head is a heavily armored battering ram, armed with those immense, interlocking tusks, and its eyes are facing forwards, giving it the sharp, focused gaze of a pursuer. This was not a creature passively waiting by the river. This was potentially an active, galloping predator of the Cretaceous floodplains. What would it have hunted? In a world teeming with dinosaurs, the possibilities are staggering. Perhaps it preyed upon the smaller ornithopod dinosaurs that browsed the vegetation along the riverbanks. Perhaps it was capable of ambushing and bringing down juvenile sauropods. Its powerful build and fearsome dentition suggest it was capable of tackling large, formidable prey. Imagine the scene. A herd of dinosaurs grazes near the water's edge. Hidden in the dense, fern-like undergrowth, the boar croc waits, its forward-facing eyes locked onto its target. Then, an explosive burst of speed, not from the water, but from the land itself. It gallops out, its heavily armored body low to the ground, closing the distance with surprising swiftness. The impact is brutal, those great tusks driving deep, a quick, violent takedown unlike anything we associate with crocodiles today. This image of a galloping, tusked, terrestrial crocodile is a compelling one, a creature perfectly suited to the brutal, supersized world of Cretaceous Africa. It paints Kaprosuchus not just as a forgotten creature, but as a truly unique and terrifying experiment in reptilian evolution. However, we must temper this exciting vision with caution. Without the post-cranial skeleton, The idea of a long-legged galloping boar croc remains speculative. It is possible it was still primarily aquatic, using its forward-facing eyes and powerful tusks to hunt large fish or ambush prey in a different manner within the water. But the clues in the skull undeniably point towards a lifestyle far more active and potentially far more terrestrial than any crocodile alive today. It was a different kind of killer, from a different, more dangerous time, and like so many of the strange experiments of the Cretaceous, its unique dynasty was not destined to last. The image of Kaprosuchus, the boar croc, whether as a galloping terrestrial hunter or a uniquely equipped aquatic ambusher, is a powerful testament to the sheer evolutionary creativity of the crocodilomorph lineage during the Cretaceous period. It represents one extreme, one specialized and fearsome solution to the challenges of survival in that land of giants. But like the giant orthocones before it, and like so many specialized forms throughout Earth's history, its reign was tied to a specific time, a specific place, and a specific set of ecological circumstances. Kaprosuchus saharicus, as far as we know from the current fossil record, seems to have been confined to the ecosystems of North Africa during the middle part of the Cretaceous period, around 95 million years ago. It shared its world with Spinosaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, and a host of other colossal dinosaurs and bizarre crocs. It was part of a unique and spectacular fauna adapted to the vast river systems and lush floodplains of its time. And then, like the ecosystem itself, it vanishes from the record. We do not find fossils of Kaprosuchus in the later stages of the Cretaceous. Its unique tusked skull disappears from the layers of rock that document the final tens of millions of years of the dinosaur age. Why? What brought an end to the dynasty of the boar croc? Unlike the end Triassic event that may have claimed Tanystropheus, there wasn't a single catastrophic mass extinction event during the Middle Cretaceous that neatly explains its disappearance. Instead, its fading from the record was likely part of a broader, slower, and more complex ecological shift. The world of the Middle Cretaceous was a dynamic one. Continents continued to drift, sea levels fluctuated, climates changed, and the ecosystems themselves were in constant flux. The specific riverine and floodplain environments that supported the unique fauna of North Africa, including Kaprosuchus, did not last forever. Environmental changes, perhaps shifts in rainfall patterns, alterations in the river systems, or changes in vegetation may have slowly eroded the ecological niche that the boar croc was so perfectly adapted to. Biological competition likely played a role as well. The Cretaceous was a time of intense evolutionary innovation. New groups of dinosaurs were emerging. Other lineages of crocodilomorphs were evolving different strategies. Perhaps new, more efficient predators arrived on the scene, outcompeting Kaprosuchus for its prey. Or perhaps changes lower down the food web, affecting the types or abundance of the animals it hunted, made its specialized hunting strategy less viable. And we must remember that specialization, while powerful, is always a gamble. Kaprosuchus, with its extreme dental weaponry and potentially specialized lifestyle, may have been exquisitely adapted to one particular set of conditions. But when those conditions changed, its very specialization might have become a trap, preventing it from adapting to a new world. Its disappearance was likely not a sudden event, but a slow dwindling, a gradual retreat into extinction as its world changed around it. It was one thread in the rich tapestry of Cretaceous life that simply frayed and broke, and its fate mirrors that of so many of the other strange, experimental crocodilomorphs of its time. The terrestrial runners, the pug-nosed herbivores, the pelican-faced filter feeders. Most of these fascinating side branches of the crocodile family tree did not survive to the end of the Cretaceous. They represent a period of wild diversification, a time when the lineage explored a vast landscape of possibility. But it was the other model, the more conservative one, the familiar semi-aquatic patient ambush predator that proved to be the most enduring. It was this blueprint, the one we still see in the crocodiles, alligators, and gharials of today, that successfully navigated the changing environments of the late Cretaceous and even managed to survive the catastrophic asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. Kaprosuchus, the boar croc, was a spectacular, fearsome, and ultimately transient expression of crocodilomorph potential. It was a forgotten king from a lost world, a creature perfectly embodying the savage grandeur of Cretaceous Africa. Its skull remains a testament to a time when crocodiles were far more than just log-like lurkers in the river, a haunting reminder of the incredible diversity that evolution can create, and then, just as easily, erase. Our final journey takes us across the second great boundary in the history of complex life, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. We leave behind the shattered world of the dinosaurs, the fiery aftermath of the asteroid impact, and emerge into a new geological era, the Cenozoic, the new life, the age that continues down to the present day. This is, most famously, the age of mammals. The cataclysm that ended the reign of the dinosaurs was not just an ending, it was a profound beginning. The ecological slate had been wiped clean once again. The giant reptiles that had dominated the planet for 160 million years were gone, with the notable exception of the birds, those feathered dinosaurs that survived. The world's ecosystems were empty, broken, waiting for new rulers. And the creatures poised to inherit this broken kingdom were the ones who had spent the entire Mesozoic living in the shadows. They were the mammals. For over 100 million years, while the dinosaurs ruled the day, mammals had been small, often nocturnal, shrew-like creatures, scurrying through the undergrowth, hiding from the giants. But they possessed a set of key evolutionary advantages. They were warm-blooded, capable of regulating their own body temperature, allowing them to thrive in the cool aftermath of the impact. They possessed fur, providing insulation against the cold. They had complex teeth, specialized for processing a variety of foods, and they invested heavily in parental care, nurturing their young, often with milk, giving them a greater chance of survival in a harsh world. When the dinosaurs vanished, it was as if a great oppressive weight had been lifted from the planet. The mammals, small and adaptable, emerged from the shadows into a world of boundless opportunity. And just like the birds, they underwent an explosive adaptive radiation. From those humble, shrew-like ancestors, they diversified with astonishing speed, radiating out to fill the countless empty ecological niches left vacant by the dinosaurs. Some took to the trees, evolving into the first primates. Some returned to the water, giving rise to the ancestors of whales and dolphins. Some became burrowers, others became gliders, and many stayed on land, experimenting with size and form in ways that rivaled even the dinosaurs they replaced. The early Cenozoic was a strange and experimental time for mammals. It was an age of evolutionary trial and error, producing bizarre forms that seem almost like mythical beasts. There were giant, flightless predatory birds, the terror birds, briefly taking over the role of apex predators. There were hoofed mammals that looked like rhinoceroses crossed with gorillas, Uintatherium. There were creodonts, strange, early carnivorous mammals unlike any modern predator. It was into this dynamic, rapidly evolving world, this new age defined by mammalian creativity, that our final forgotten creature emerges. It belongs to a group known as the Perissodactyla, the odd-toed ungulates, the same group that includes modern horses, rhinoceroses, and tapirs. But this creature was no ordinary hoofed mammal. It was an evolutionary chimera, a biological paradox that seemed assembled from the parts of entirely different animals, a creature whose very existence would baffle scientists and challenge our neat classifications of the mammalian world. This was the Knuckle-Walker. The discovery of our final forgotten creature was not a single, clean event, but a slow, piecemeal puzzle assembled from perplexing fragments found scattered across the continents and across millions of years of Cenozoic rock. When the first bones of these strange mammals began to emerge from fossil sites in Europe, Asia, and North America in the 19th century, they presented paleontologists with a seemingly impossible riddle, a creature that looked like it had been stitched together from the spare parts of entirely unrelated animals. Imagine the scene in a dusty museum laboratory. A scientist lays out the newly unearthed fossils. Here is a skull. It is long, low, and distinctly horse-like, with high-crowned, complex grinding teeth clearly adapted for chewing tough vegetation. It looks, for all the world, like the head of some kind of primitive horse or perhaps a close relative of the rhinoceros. An odd-toed ungulate, clearly. But then, next to this familiar herbivorous skull, lies another bone from the same fossil layer, perhaps even found in association with the skull. It is a foot bone, but it bears no resemblance to the neat, compact hoof of a horse or the sturdy, pillar-like foot of a rhino. Instead, it ends in an enormous, deeply curved and sharply pointed structure. It looks undeniably like a massive claw. A claw perhaps more suited to a giant ground sloth or even a great predatory bear. How could these two pieces possibly belong to the same animal? A horse-headed creature with the claws of a giant sloth? It seemed biologically absurd. The confusion only deepened as more bones were unearthed. The forelimbs were revealed to be long, powerful, and strangely proportioned, much longer than the hind limbs, giving the creature a somewhat sloped, gorilla-like stance. The hind limbs were shorter, stouter, built more conventionally for bearing weight. The picture emerging was not just strange, it was contradictory. Herbivore teeth, predator claws, long grasping arms, short sturdy legs, a horse's head on a body that seemed borrowed from a sloth or an ape. The initial attempts to classify these creatures were, understandably, chaotic. Some scientists, focusing on the teeth and skull, placed them firmly within the ungulates, perhaps as aberrant relatives of horses or tapirs. Others, struck by the massive claws and unusual limbs, allied them with the edentates, the group including sloths, armadillos, and anteaters, creatures known for their strange anatomies and often formidable claws. For a time, these fossils were scattered across different branches of the mammalian family tree, their true identity obscured by their seemingly impossible combination of features. It took decades of further discoveries, including more complete skeletons that showed the horse-like skull definitively attached to the claw-bearing limbs, for the scientific community to accept the astonishing truth. This was one creature, a single, real, and incredibly bizarre lineage of mammals that combined features we now associate with entirely different ways of life. They were formerly grouped into a unique family, the Chalicotheres. The name comes from Greek words meaning pebble beast, perhaps referring to the shape of their teeth, though the exact origin is debated. But the name belies the sheer, almost mythical strangeness of their form. The puzzle of their identity was solved. They were indeed odd-toed ungulates, relatives of horses and rhinos. But they had embarked on a completely different evolutionary path, abandoning the traditional hoof for a set of tools, those massive claws that seemed utterly out of place on an herbivore. The next great question was obvious. Why? What was this horse-headed, gorilla-armed, claw-footed creature doing? The Chalicotheres, now recognized as a single, albeit bizarre, lineage of odd-toed ungulates, were not a monolithic group. Like any successful family that persists for millions of years, they diversified, adapting to different environments and evolving distinct variations on their strange anatomical theme. As paleontologists piece together more complete skeletons from across the Cenozoic era, spanning from the Eocene epoch right through to the Oligocene epoch Pleistocene, a clearer picture emerged. There were, it seemed, two main branches, two distinct subfamilies within the Chalicotheriidae, each pursuing a slightly different path. The first group, known as the Schizotheriinae, represented perhaps the more primitive or generalized form. A prime example is the genus Meropus, whose fossils are particularly well known from North America. These creatures still possessed the characteristic claws and somewhat unusual limb proportions, but perhaps to a less extreme degree. Their forelimbs were long, but perhaps not quite as disproportionately long as their cousins. Their skulls, while still horse-like, might have been adapted for browsing on slightly different kinds of vegetation. Imagine Meropus moving through the open woodlands or savanna-like environments of Miocene North America. It was likely a large animal, perhaps the size of a modern horse or a large tapir. How did it walk? The structure of its feet suggests it may not have been a full-time knuckle-walker. Perhaps it walked more on the sides of its feet, or even somewhat flat-footed, its claws held slightly raised off the ground as it moved. It presents a slightly less bizarre, perhaps more transitional image, a creature still clearly an ungulate, but one experimenting with the strange inheritance of claws. But it was the second group, the Chalicotheriinae, that truly embraced the evolutionary extreme. This subfamily, which includes the namesake genus Chalicotherium found across Europe and Asia, represents the classic and arguably the strangest iteration of the Chalicother body plan. These were the true knuckle-walkers. Picture Chalicotherium emerging from the dense forests of Miocene Europe. It is a creature of striking and unsettling proportions. Its hind legs are relatively short and stout, built for bearing weight, but its forelimbs are incredibly long, powerful, and almost ape-like, giving it a distinctly sloped back, its shoulders held high, its hips low. It resembles, in its overall posture, a giant gorilla, or perhaps an enormous, heavily built anteater. And its hands. The feet end in those colossal, deeply curved, and formidable claws. Walking directly on these claws would have been impossible. They would have been blunted, broken, and useless. And so, Chalicotherium adopted the same solution that gorillas and chimpanzees independently evolved. It walked on its knuckles. It would curl its great claws inwards, tucking them safely away, and bear its weight on the thickened, padded knuckles of its forelimbs. Imagine the gait. A slow, perhaps slightly lumbering rolling motion, its long arms reaching forward, knuckles planting firmly on the ground, its shorter hind legs providing the main propulsive force. It would have been a unique and perhaps somewhat awkward way of moving. The walk of a creature designed for power rather than speed, perfectly adapted for navigating the soft floor of its forest home. These two distinct body forms likely reflect adaptations to different habitats and diets. The more generalized Meropus and its relatives may have thrived in more open environments, browsing on a wider variety of vegetation. The highly specialized Chalicotherium, with its extreme knuckle-walking posture and incredibly long arms, seems perfectly built for a life in dense forests, perhaps using its unique anatomy to reach high into the trees, or to dig for resources hidden beneath the ground. The Chalicotheres were not a single, strange footnote in mammalian history. They were a diverse and successful group that persisted for over 40 million years, exploring different ways to combine the seemingly contradictory traits of an herbivore's head and a digger's claws. But the central mystery remained, sharpened now by the image of that great knuckle-walking Chalicotherium. What precisely were those magnificent, terrifying claws actually for? We arrive now at the heart of the Chalicother enigma, the feature that seemed so utterly paradoxical, so out of place on an otherwise peaceable herbivore, those enormous, curved and wickedly sharp claws. Why would a creature with the teeth of a horse possess the weaponry of a giant sloth or a bear? What possible use could a plant eater have for such formidable tools? This question puzzled paleontologists for over a century, leading to a range of ingenious and sometimes conflicting hypotheses. The first, and perhaps most obvious suggestion, was defense. Imagine a Chalicotherium, perhaps disturbed by one of the large predators of its time. Maybe a giant bear dog, or one of the early saber-toothed cats. While its knuckle-walking gait suggests it was not built for speed or escape, those massive claws, attached to long, powerful forelimbs, would have been truly terrifying defensive weapons. Rearing up on its hind legs, it could have slashed downwards with devastating force, capable of inflicting grievous wounds on any attacker foolish enough to get too close. The claws, in this view, were the great equalizers, the deterrent that allowed this slow-moving herbivore to survive in a world of carnivores. A second possibility focuses not on defense, but on feeding. Perhaps the claws were not weapons at all, but specialized tools. The long arms and robust build of creatures like Chalicotherium suggest they were capable of exerting considerable force. Could they have used their claws like giant grappling hooks? Imagine the creature rearing up, reaching high into the branches of a tree with its long arms, hooking those powerful claws around a limb, and then using its body weight to pull the branch down, bringing the tender leaves and fruits within reach of its horse-like muzzle. This hook-and-pull browsing strategy would elegantly explain the combination of herbivorous teeth and powerful clawed forelimbs, painting a picture of a highly specialized tree browser. A related feeding hypothesis suggests the claws were used for digging. Perhaps Chalicotheres supplemented their diet by excavating nutritious roots and tubers from the ground. Their powerful forelimbs and robust claws would have been excellent tools for breaking through tough soil, uncovering hidden underground larders. This behavior is seen in many modern animals, from pigs to bears, and it would fit well with the generalist, herbivorous nature indicated by their teeth. Imagine a moropus on the open plains, using its claws to systematically dig for underground plant storage organs, a slow but steady source of food. Could the claws have served multiple purposes? It's entirely possible. Perhaps they were primarily for pulling down branches, but also served as effective defensive weapons when necessary. Perhaps different species specialized, with the forest-dwelling Chalicotherium focusing on branch pulling, while the more open-country Moropus engaged in more digging. What seems unlikely is that the claws were used for climbing, despite their resemblance to those of sloths. The overall build of the Chalicotheres, particularly their stout hind limbs and heavy bodies, suggests they were firmly grounded creatures, not agile tree dwellers. The mystery of the claws highlights the challenge of reconstructing behavior from bones alone. Each hypothesis offers a plausible scenario, a potential life story written in the language of anatomy. But without a time machine, without the ability to watch these strange creatures move and interact with their world, we are left piecing together the most likely narrative from the silent, stony clues they left behind. What is clear is that these claws were central to the Chalicother way of life. They were not some vestigial remnant or evolutionary mistake. They were highly specialized, constantly used, and clearly successful tools that allowed this unique lineage of mammals to thrive for an immense span of time, navigating their world in a slow, powerful, and utterly distinctive way. Let us now try to assemble these strange, disparate pieces: the horse-like head, the gorilla-like arms, the bear-like claws, the sturdy hind limbs, into a picture of a living, breathing animal. What was life actually like for a Chalicother? Their unique anatomy paints a portrait not of speed or aggression, but of a slow, deliberate, and perhaps somewhat solitary existence. Imagine a Chalicotherium moving through the dense Miocene forest. Its knuckle-walking gait is not built for speed. It is a slow, rolling, almost ponderous movement. This was not an animal that could outrun its predators. Its survival depended on its size, its strength, and perhaps the formidable defense offered by those great claws. Its world was likely perceived at a walking pace, a slow exploration of its familiar territory. Its horse-like skull and complex grinding teeth tell us definitively that it was an herbivore, but unlike the horses and rhinos that were its distant cousins, it was likely not a grazer, cropping tough grasses from the open plains. Its teeth seem better suited for a softer diet: leaves, twigs, fruits, perhaps soft bark or roots. It was a browser, carefully selecting its meals from the forest vegetation. How did it reach its food? If the hook and pull hypothesis is correct, its daily routine would have involved a slow, deliberate survey of the forest, seeking out suitable trees. Upon finding one, it would rear up onto its stout hind legs, using its long, powerful arms and hooked claws to grasp branches high above the ground. With a slow, steady pull, it would bring the foliage down to within reach of its muzzle, methodically stripping the leaves and tender shoots with its specialized teeth. It would have been a quiet, peaceful, and highly effective way to access a food source unavailable to many other ground-dwelling herbivores. If digging was part of its repertoire, particularly for forms like Moropus in more open habitats, we can picture it using those same powerful forelimbs and claws to systematically excavate patches of ground, uncovering nutritious roots and tubers. This would have been slow, methodical work, perhaps occupying large portions of its day. Was it a social creature? Its relatively small brain size compared to highly social ungulates like horses suggests perhaps not, while some fossil sites contain multiple individuals, suggesting they might have occasionally gathered. The overall picture is perhaps one of a more solitary or small group existence, like modern-day rhinoceroses or tapirs. Imagine them moving slowly through their territories, largely independent, perhaps interacting primarily during mating season. Their senses were likely well adapted to their environment. Their horse-like head suggests good hearing and perhaps a keen sense of smell, useful for detecting predators or locating specific food plants in the dense undergrowth. Their eyesight was probably adequate, though perhaps less crucial than smell and hearing in their forest or woodland habitats. Life for a Chalicothere was likely a slow, quiet rhythm, dictated by the search for food and the avoidance of danger. It was not a life of high drama or frantic chases. It was a life of steady, powerful deliberation, perfectly tuned to the specific ecological niche that its bizarre anatomy allowed it to exploit. For over 40 million years, this unique blueprint was a success. From the warm forests of the Eocene to the cooling woodlands of the Pliocene, these strange knuckle-walking herbivores held their own, adapting and diversifying across multiple continents. They were a testament to the fact that evolution does not always favor speed or grace. Sometimes the most enduring solutions are the slow, the powerful, and the profoundly strange. But even this long and successful reign, like all the forgotten dynasties before it, was eventually destined to come to an end. For an immense span of time, far longer than our own human species has existed, the Chalicotheres were a successful and enduring feature of the mammalian world. From their emergence in the Eocene epoch, around 50 million years ago, they spread across North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa, adapting to forests, woodlands, and perhaps even more open habitats. Their strange, seemingly contradictory body plan, that unique blend of horsehead and gorilla arms, was clearly a winning formula for a very long time. And yet, today, they are gone. Sometime during the Pleistocene epoch, the period of the Great Ice Ages, perhaps less than 2 million years ago, the last of the Chalicotheres vanished from the Earth. Why? What brought an end to this long and peculiar dynasty? As with so many extinctions, there is likely no single simple answer. Their decline was probably a slow, complex process, driven by the profound environmental shifts that characterized the later Cenozoic era. The world was changing. The warm, stable climates of the Eocene and Miocene were giving way to a cooler, drier, and far more variable world. Forests began to shrink, replaced by expanding grasslands and savannas. This climate change fundamentally altered the landscapes that the Chalicotheres had called home for millions of years. For forest specialists like Chalicotherium, the loss of their preferred habitat would have been devastating. Even for the more adaptable forms like Moropus, the shift towards tougher, grittier grasses, a food source their browsing teeth were poorly suited for, would have presented a significant challenge. At the same time, they faced increasing biological competition. The Cenozoic saw the explosive rise and diversification of other, perhaps more conventional, groups of large herbivores. The true horses evolved, becoming highly efficient grazers of the new grasslands. Elephants and their relatives developed into massive, powerful browsers and grazers. Rhinoceroses, deer, and antelope filled countless niches. These newer, perhaps more adaptable or faster reproducing herbivores may have simply outcompeted the slow, specialized Chalicotheres for dwindling resources. And finally, the changing world brought new predators. While Chalicotheres likely held their own against the predators of the early Cenozoic, the later stages of the era saw the evolution of highly intelligent, pack-hunting carnivores like wolves and incredibly powerful cats, including the great saber-tooths. Could these new, more sophisticated predators have learned to overcome the defenses of the slow-moving, knuckle-walking giants? It was likely a combination of these pressures: a changing climate stealing their homes and their food, increasing competition from more adaptable herbivores, and perhaps new, more effective predators that slowly, inexorably, pushed the Chalicotheres towards extinction. They were specialists, perfectly adapted to a world that was vanishing around them. And so, the last Chalicothere walked the earth, its strange, knuckle-shod gait falling silent forever. What then is their legacy? They left behind no direct descendants that walk among us today. They are a closed chapter, but their story is a profound testament to the sheer, almost whimsical creativity of mammalian evolution. They remind us that the path of life is not always predictable, that evolution can produce forms that seem to defy our neat categories and expectations. And perhaps their greatest legacy is a final, beautiful taxonomic surprise. When scientists finally unraveled their place on the mammalian family tree, using subtle clues in their teeth and ankle bones, the answer was astonishing. These creatures, with their gorilla-like arms and sloth-like claws, were not related to primates or sloths at all. Their closest living relatives are the perissodactyls, the horses, the rhinoceroses, and the tapirs. That strange, knuckle-walking, clawed creature of the forest was, in the deepest sense, a kind of horse. A horse that took a radically different path, a path that led it into the shadows of the forest, onto its knuckles, and, ultimately, into the silent embrace of extinction. They are the last of our forgotten creatures tonight. 5 ghosts summoned from the deep past: the spiny hallucination, the straight-horned leviathan, the impossible neck, the tusked croc, and the knuckle-walking horse. Each one a unique story, a different experiment, a testament to the boundless, bizarre, and beautiful journey of life on Earth. Each one a quiet reminder that the history of our planet is far stranger and far richer than we often imagine.